I want to continue my discussion of the issue of revenge in Hamlet. And Shakespeare, in this great play, makes revenge into something very problematic. And in some ways it is. Revenge is problematic, but why? It's problematic because in revenge, you're going outside the law. You're making yourself an instrument of the law. But let's remember that revenge is less problematic in Hamlet for a simple reason. Hamlet is not carrying out. He isn't being asked to carry out some private revenge. He is actually being asked to avenge his father and in the process remove the lawlessness that has installed itself as the ruling power of Denmark. So something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Why? Because the fish rots from the head. So tyranny has established itself. Tyranny here referring not to tyranny versus rule of the people, but rather a bad king, an unlawful king, versus old Hamlet, who is, of course, a lawful king. Now, throughout the play, Hamlet hesitates. He postpones. He is in anguish. He has long kind of monologues in which he thinks about, he moves into his interior life. And these monologues are so extensive and so philosophical that some people have wondered if the play itself, the plot, is just kind of an excuse for these monologues. So the monologues, far from being a digression from the play, appear to have to take on a kind of life of their own. So you've got the narrative of the play, the revenge plot, and then you've got Hamlet's interior discussions and monologues, and occasionally he's also talking to Horatio and to others and sort of divulging his private thoughts. I think the way to reconcile these two, the plot on the one hand and Hamlet's interior life on the other, is to look at them as pulling in opposite directions. The plot is saying to Hamlet, do it. To do or not to do, act. And Hamlet is constantly thinking. Hamlet is always to be or not to be. That is the question. Well, that's not really the question. The question is, what, Hamlet, are you going to do to rectify the rottenness that is now in Denmark? If you contrast Hamlet with Julius Caesar, you see that in the play Julius Caesar, Brutus has no compunction in acting. Brutus will immediately, once he decides, and Brutus doesn't decide right away, Brutus actually has to think about it. Here's Brutus. Since Cassius first did whet me against Caesar, I have not slept. Between the acting of a dreadful thing and the first motion, all the interim is like a phantasma or a hideous dream. The genius and the mortal instruments are then in council, and the state of man, like to a little kingdom, suffers then the nature of an insurrection. So Brutus is having this inner convulsion, but the inner convulsion is on the purely natural plane. Basically, Brutus is trying to think about, should I do it? Is Caesar really a tyrant? If he is a tyrant, how do I make it work? And those are Brutus's main questions. This is not to say that you don't have an element of the supernatural. At one point, a ghost shows up, but Brutus talks to the ghost as if the ghost is just another character in the play. I will see thee at Philippi. Okay, see you then. So there's no sense here that you are being pulled out of this world and into another world. But contrast this with Hamlet. When Hamlet sees the ghost, his father's ghost, the ghost, old Hamlet, describes himself as, quote, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in days of nature are burnt and purged away. Old Hamlet is kind of in purgatory. He's experiencing the flames of purgatory. His soul is haunted. So there's a very clear sense here that there's another life. And our fate in this life is connected to that life. And Hamlet is operating in this sense in a supernatural universe completely different from Brutus. You see this right away when Hamlet goes to kill Claudius. And what does he see Claudius doing? Claudius is praying. And Hamlet says, I'm now going to quote Hamlet, he says he can't do it, quote, now that he is praying. And Hamlet goes on to say, listen, I want to sort of catch him when he is committing some sin, because that way he'll go straight to hell. I'd like to sort of catch him when he's sort of in my mother's bed. Great, I'll get him then, straight to hell. Now, what Hamlet doesn't know, of course, is that Claudius, right before we've seen Claudius attempting to pray, and Claudius can't pray. He says, quote, "Pray can I not?" And why not? Because he's still in possession of the fruits of his sin. See, one of the things about repenting of a sin, hey, I'm sorry I stole it. Well, you know what? Give it back. If you're still in possession of it, you should divest yourself. Otherwise, how sorry are you? So with Claudius, he's unwilling to give up the kingdom. He's unwilling to give up the fruits of his crime. And therefore, in a certain honest sense, he goes, I really can't pray. But Hamlet doesn't know this. So here's Hamlet. And Hamlet, of course, I'm now going to turn to his great speech, which I'm just going to read a couple of lines of. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Hamlet is contemplating suicide. And what scares him? What scares him is he doesn't know what's going to come after death. Here we go, death. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. We don't know what the life to come is. We could be actually putting ourselves in greater danger. Why? Because death may not be the worst thing in the world. Eternal damnation is manifestly worse. Now, what's really interesting, if you read this speech, it talks about sort of and scholars love this because it's like Hamlet's reflecting on the troubles of life. And it takes you a moment to realize that those troubles have nothing to do with Hamlet's current situation. Hamlet's current situation has nothing to do with the fact that, oh, life is full of troubles. Oh, our body begins to break down over time. Oh, it is the case that our mind our thoughts and imaginations outrun what we can actually achieve. None of that. Hamlet has a simple task ahead of him. To be or not to be is not the question before him. The question before him is, are you going to rid Denmark of despotic Claudius? Yes or no? Yes or no? So this is a political play in which Hamlet's task is not to be or not to be, but to do or not to do. And I think what we see here and what Shakespeare depicts is the effect of Hamlet's Christian conscience in putting shackles around his action. Now, eventually Hamlet does take action. But notice that when he takes action, in some ways it's far worse than had he acted before. There's Hamlet, his negligence leads to Ophelia's death. In some ways, Hamlet is the direct cause of Ophelia's death. She might have committed death by suicide. Hamlet erroneously kills Polonius, thinking that he's Claudius. There's a man behind the curtain. Hamlet thinks it's Claudius. Turns out to be Polonius. Hamlet then, by killing Polonius, stimulates the revenge of Polonius' son, Laertes, who comes to kill Hamlet. And there are bodies on the stage all over the place by the time the play ends. So wouldn't Hamlet, this is the question to ask, wouldn't Hamlet have been better off had he acted first and thought later? Not because it is a good idea to just act on impulse, but because Hamlet actually had a political mission in front of him, and in failing to carry it out, he ended up with a situation far worse. In fact, a situation in which not Hamlet, but Fortinbras, who's coming from Norway, an external power, now inherits the throne of Denmark.